Okay, today I thought I would discuss hydraulic forming that my daughter turned me on to years ago, and I've kind of, as I usually do, take things to a different extreme level and find how many different ways you can do it. But the basis of hydraulic forming is polyurethane rubber versus regular rubber, and then the durometer of the rubber. And basically the difference between regular rubber and polyurethane is regular rubber will compress when you push it. It gets smaller and the molecules get smaller. Polyurethane is kind of like water or hydraulic fluid. It won't compress, so it displaces, and if you push a piece you'll end up with these bubbles popping out, which I'll show you on the press later. But because of the displacement, if you put a shape underneath that has hollows in it in detail and then put a piece of annealed copper or sterling or whatever metal you want over it, when you push down on it, the polyurethane tries to go into the voids on whatever you're doing. Like in here, it would push into these voids instead of compressing. So as it pushes into the voids, it forces the copper into the voids where the copper's not supported. And it's amazing the detail you get. Here's one right here that was pressed on it wasn't this one, but a piece just like it. And these are kind of funny. These are what hold the doors on crypts closed. And I guess people steal them all the time, so that there's a guy that comes and reinstalls them, and he gave me a whole handful of different ones to play with. But back to, okay, the important thing about polyurethane or any rubber is a thing called durometer. And durometer is the measure of hardness of the rubber. So I have a number of pieces of rubber here, starting with these, which were drops from Colorado Water Jet from a job, and these measure 45. Okay, this is called a durometer. It's made by Shore. And when I push down on it, this little tip will push into the material. And depending on how far it'll push into the material will tell the durometer of it. So I'm going to push here. And this piece right there is 40 durometer. When you're hydraulic forming, you build a stack, and I have this little tray that I build my stack on, and you put whatever you're going to imprint on here first. Then you put a piece of annealed copper, which I'll demonstrate that in a minute, but you would put the piece of copper on next, and then you would start with a hard piece, and that, like, this is 85 durometer or 80 durometer. You put it on and you press it up to about 12 tons, and then you back it off and you look at it, and if it's starting to push in, then you may have to re-anneal it, otherwise you can end up tearing it. But then you would start like at 85, then go to 80, then down to 60, and the problem is they get exploded after a while. And then the final push is with the 40. And the 40, because it's so soft, you have to stack a bunch of them up. And that's what gives you the final detail after everything's pushed. The copper, as it's rolled, gets work hardened, and it won't hydraulic form. So being a non-ferrous metal, it's the opposite of steel. You heat it, and then if you don't have to quench it, but you can quench it right away, and it becomes dead soft. So I put it in the forge, and I get it up to just a fairly bright red, but you got to work fast. Bright red becomes liquid pretty fast. Just dead soft now. I can just bend it real easily. If you don't have presses, you can still play with this stuff. Like, I'm going to put this little image just on my workbench and then put a piece of anneal copper over it, and then I'll come in with a piece of 80, and it doesn't work quite as good as the press, but it's a pretty surprising how well it works. You hit it with a heavy hammer, and you can see it starting the image already. But if you had a striker, you could do this on the anvil with a flatter, and it would work really well. It just doesn't quite get the detail because it's an impact and not constant pressure. But that gives you an idea of this is a press I made for my daughter, and normally we put a stack of drops in here so you don't have to pump as far, but you can load it up and then hand pump it and it comes up. I'm not gonna go all the way through it, but I made this for, you know, $25 for the jack and then some metal scrap, and just drilled holes, and then some springs came from Ace that help push it back down quicker. But it works really well for like jewelry kind of stuff, and that's what my daughter used it for. Although now that she lives here, she comes over and uses the big press for everything. So this is just an example. So you can do it on the treadle hammer. You do your stack and then just come down and do it a whap. You can also do it on a fly press. I just have kind of a booster block and a pusher that I made out of a piece of drop, and you just stack your metal like you would anywhere else and put it in the fly press. So you do the same stack, and then you start with this. I'm going to start with a 60 durometer, and you basically slam it down. You can see it got it going pretty good. I didn't get it centered well, but you can see the detail. Another thing that's kind of fun to do is to add more elements to the design. It would be to add a fold form to the design. So I would fold a piece of copper over, and then open it back up, which just gives a layered look, and then it's just kind of fun to throw another one. And then open it back up. And then that gives me a double layered look. I'm gonna show you on the big press my favorite, which these were a drop from Colorado Water Jet from the doing the Rialto. But on here, I don't know if you notice how sharp the edges are. If you are using sharp edges, you'll just slice the material if you don't anneal in between, if you want to get a really crisp. I've gone on this one and rounded the edges all the way around, so that'll help, but I'm still going to have to anneal this part way through. So my favorite to use is my bigger hydraulic press, because you can control the pressure much easier, and you don't have the situation when you're hitting it where it wants to move and getting the double print like I got the other. There are some disadvantages, and I'll show you what can happen if you don't anneal during pressing on something. So you would stack your material, and then come on down. And go to the next durometer, which is the real fine. And if you watch, it'll almost bubble out. And if you look at it, it looks pretty good, but when I pop it out, if you look at the centers and all around the edges, it's cut it. You can see it really well right there, because the metal just could not stretch, because it was work hardened just from that original push. The one that I fold formed, I'm going to first press it with the 60 durometer. Only taking it up to about 10, 12 tons. Knocking it off, and it's already starting to rip. Just going to take it up to about 10 tons and let it sit for a second. And it's amazing how fast this work hardens. I'm going to go ahead and anneal this again before we push it any farther. Okay, and it's annealed again, so now I'm going to push it with the 40, and hopefully it won't burst through. I'll take it up to about 15 tons. Let it sit for a second. Now let it drip. No, it didn't. So now it's annealed one more time. This time we're going to take it down to about 25 tons. And hopefully it won't rip. But see how the rubber displaces out and forms these like big bubbles? I'll let it sit for a second and then we'll back it off. I'm going to take it down one more time and go just a little farther. It's always disconcerting. You'd think like this rubber's going to shoot out at you, but it doesn't. This is my favorite little chasing hammer. I made it out of 4140, turned it on the lathe, so it's basically a machining project. But when I heat treated it, I put it in a stainless bag so that it wouldn't get all pitted. And I just took and quenched the whole bag, which is a mistake. You're supposed to rip the bag and pull the metal out of the bag while it's still in the oven and then quench it. And I didn't realize that, so it didn't get as hard as I wanted, but it still works really good. So these little chasing tools, I've actually had classes here where we've made probably hundreds and hundreds of tools. These are car valves, and which is, we think, H13. But if you grind it without getting it really hot and keep it cool, and the trick of that is as you're grinding, hold your fingers close to the area you're grinding. Then as soon as it becomes at all uncomfortable, then you quench it, and they stay extremely hard. And for the most part, you're using them on brass and copper and bronze and stuff. So I had asked a local shop that does head work for automobiles if I could get some valves, and he said sure. He goes through hundreds and hundreds a week. So he called me up and he said, I got some for you. And I went over and he had 4 big boxes that I could barely lift. And we've had, I think, 3 or 4 tool classes using these things in the classes, and I still have some left. But I just kind of wanted to show, like right in here, there's a line where the hydraulic forming gave us a nice radius. I think it's kind of fun to go in there with a sharp chasing tool and run down that line and drive it in. And it gives you just this super crisp line. It makes the shadows play off of it a whole lot better. I don't know if you can see how much more the depth of the line appears now. And then a lot of times I'll have them come in and do texture And these texture tools are really hard to make. I just beat them into a old horseshoe rasp, into the backside, the straight lines that are on the backside of a horseshoe rasp, and this gives pretty kind of cool texture when you go around. And the kids tend to really get into this. I find if you hold the tool up just a hair above the surface, you know, a few thousandths, it bounces and gives a nicer texture. Another texture I like is just with a fairly sharp chasing tool, and I turn it as I'm hitting it, and it gives kind of this, I don't know, I see it as kind of a Japanese looking texture that like on the, can't remember what they're called, the sword guards, or on a lot of the stuff that Seth Gould does, except his is all perfectly aligned and there's nothing random about it. Gives you you can get all kinds of neat textures. Like this was a piece of a backsplash, and you can see the texture that it gives. And then not seeing it, but this does a really nice texture. It's another piece of woven metal. Here's actually the texture from this, and that's where I put the other drop from Colorado Water Jet, and then pushed through, and then gave it a background texture by stacking stuff up. These are just fun, where we've driven it down in and then added different texture to the cross, and then it's fun to take these highlighter pens that you can get at Office Depot, and you can add just a hue of color with it, and it's kind of cool how you can because you can see through it, it doesn't hide anything, but it adds this kind of color line to it that's kind of fun. It really makes a difference in how the piece comes out. And if the pieces are going to get handled, then you can spray it with some clear lacquer or something. But it's pretty sturdy for if they're Christmas ornaments, which a lot of these were, the intent of these is Christmas ornaments. This is a little chasing I did, probably 8 or 9 years ago, under the treadle hammer. It's my little favorite Hopi Navajo bear with the energy coming from the earth up to heaven. But I got this idea that I really liked it and I'd like to have a copy of it. So I put a piece of metal over it and I hydraulic formed it, and I made a print basically of it. And it can be, shined up, and it looks pretty cool. Just another use of hydraulic forming.
Go ahead.
This is a little piece I just did. It was repousse into a piece of carpet, and then texturing directly on the table. Just kind of fun. But you can almost get the same effect. This was more free-formed and done all by hand, and so I pushed it up and then I pushed it back down, and it was just into a piece of carpet. It wasn't into a pitch bowl or anything.